What if the version of you that feels tired, anxious, overextended, and strangely disconnected is not the real you at all? What if the life you have been trying so hard to fix does not need more force, more strategy, or more effort, but less? Less noise, less pretending, less attachment to the identity you learned to perform. Because one of the greatest misunderstandings about transformation is this: most people think they must become someone new, when in truth, the deepest shift begins when you stop clinging to who you were taught to be. That is why so many people feel exhausted even when they are doing everything right. They are not only carrying responsibilities, they are carrying roles, old emotional agreements, invisible expectations, survival patterns dressed up as personality. And after a while, the soul begins to whisper what the mind does not want to hear. This is not your natural state. Have you noticed how some people walk into a room and say almost nothing, yet their presence changes everything? It is not because they are performing confidence. It is because they are no longer leaking energy into inner conflict. Their power comes from coherence, from being rooted, from no longer fighting themselves every second. And here is the deeper question that changes everything. If your energy is shaped by what you keep rehearsing internally, then who would you be if you stopped rehearsing the old self? Because the moment you truly see what has been false, the process of becoming unrecognizable has already begun. Have you ever wondered why, no matter how much you try to think positively, something inside you still feels misaligned? What if the issue is not your lack of effort, but the direction of your attention? Most people believe that transformation happens by adding something new, new habits, new thoughts, new affirmations. But in the deeper mechanics of consciousness, energy does not respond to what you try to add. It responds to what you stop reinforcing. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because every thought you repeat, every emotional reaction you rehearse, every story you silently agree with becomes a pattern your nervous system recognizes as you. Not because it is true, but because it is familiar. And the body, more than the mind, is loyal to familiarity. So even when you try to raise your vibration, if your inner world is still anchored in old reactions, overthinking, tension, subtle fear, your energy remains contracted. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are still identified with the old signal. Now imagine this. Instead of trying to replace your thoughts, you simply stop chasing them. You observe them. You let them pass, like clouds that no longer define the sky. Something quiet begins to happen. Space appears. And in that space, a different kind of power emerges. Not forced, not performative, but deeply stable. Presence. Because the less you are entangled in thought, the more energy becomes available to simply be. And here is the shift most people miss. Presence is not passive, it is magnetic. So the real question is, what would happen if you stopped trying to control your mind and instead allowed yourself to step out of it? If this is resonating with you, take a moment to subscribe and like the video. It helps more people access this message, and it anchors the shift within you. Have you ever noticed how the more you try to control your thoughts, the louder they seem to become? What if the very act of trying to fix your mind is what keeps you trapped inside it? There is a subtle but powerful illusion at play here. You are taught that mastery means control, that if you could just manage your thoughts, eliminate the negative ones, and replace them with better ones, everything would change. But what if true mastery is not control, but separation? Because the moment you begin to observe your thoughts instead of identifying with them, something profound happens. You realize that thoughts are not commands. They are not truths. They are not even you. They are movements, patterns passing through awareness. And awareness itself is untouched. Think about it. If you can notice a thought, then there must be something in you that is not that thought. Something still, something stable, something that does not rise and fall with every internal narrative. This is where real power begins. Because once you stop reacting to every thought, you stop feeding it energy. And when a thought is not fed, it loses its grip, not by force, but by irrelevance. This is why people who cultivate this awareness begin to feel lighter, clearer, almost unbothered by what used to consume them. Not because life changed overnight, but because their relationship to their inner world did. So here is the question that opens a new level of freedom. What if your peace has never been blocked, only overshadowed by the habit of believing every thought you hear? What if the constant need to figure everything out is not intelligence but a subtle form of fear? Have you ever felt that quiet pressure to mentally solve your life before you can finally relax? As if clarity must come first, and only then are you allowed to feel at ease? This is one of the most invisible traps of the mind. Because overthinking does not come from clarity, it comes from a nervous system trying to protect you. When the body is in a subtle state of tension, the mind begins to scan, analyze, predict. It tries to control outcomes, avoid mistakes, and prevent discomfort before it even arrives. And it disguises this as responsibility, awareness, even self-improvement. But look closer. How much of your thinking is actually creating solutions, and how much is simply recycling uncertainty? Because true clarity does not emerge from pressure. It emerges from stillness. When you slow down, when you stop trying to mentally outrun the unknown, your system begins to regulate. The urgency softens, the noise fades, and something deeper becomes accessible, a quiet knowing that does not need to argue, justify, or prove itself. This is where your energy begins to shift, from contraction to openness, from control to trust. And here is the paradox most people never consider. The more you try to control life from your mind, the less available you become to experience it. So what if, instead of trying to think your way into certainty, you allowed yourself to rest inside the unknown and let clarity come to you? What if the version of you that feels tense, reactive, or overwhelmed is not flawed, but simply protecting you? Have you ever caught yourself repeating the same patterns, overthinking, people-pleasing, avoiding, controlling, and wondered why it feels so hard to change, even when you are aware of it? It is easy to label these behaviors as weaknesses. But what if they are not weaknesses at all, and instead, they are strategies your system learned to keep you safe? At some point in your life, these patterns worked. They helped you belong. Avoid rejection. Stay in control of unpredictable situations. They created a sense of emotional safety when you did not yet have the tools to feel grounded within yourself. And because they worked, your nervous system stored them, not as options but as defaults. This is why awareness alone is not enough. You can understand your patterns intellectually, but if your body still associates openness with risk, it will pull you back into what feels familiar. Not because you are failing, but because your system is trying to protect you from what it perceives as danger. And here is where transformation becomes deeper. It is not about fighting your patterns. It is about seeing them clearly and meeting them without judgment. Because the moment you stop rejecting these parts of yourself, something softens. The resistance dissolves. And what once felt automatic begins to loosen its grip. So instead of asking, how do I get rid of this? What if you asked, what is this protecting me from? Because that question does not create resistance, it creates understanding. And understanding is the beginning of true freedom. What if the reason you feel drained is not what you are doing, but what you are constantly consuming? Have you ever finished scrolling, watching, listening, only to feel more restless than before? Not because the content was wrong, but because your system never had a moment to settle. In a world designed to keep your attention externally engaged, your internal clarity quietly dissolves. Every piece of information you absorb does not just stay in your mind, it imprints on your nervous system. The speed, the comparison, the emotional charge, the subtle urgency, all of it accumulates. And over time, your baseline state shifts from grounded presence to low-grade reactivity. You may not even notice it at first, but suddenly, silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels unfamiliar. And without realizing it, you begin to depend on stimulation just to feel normal. This is how energetic clarity gets diluted. Because clarity is not something you create. It is something that emerges when there is space. And space cannot exist in a system that is constantly filled. Now imagine this: you reduce the noise, even slightly. You allow moments where nothing is entering your mind. No input, no distraction, no external influence. At first, it may feel empty, but then something begins to return. Your own rhythm, your own thoughts, your own presence. And with that, a different kind of energy becomes available, clean, stable, unmistakably yours. So, here's the question. If your external inputs are shaping your internal state, what kind of energy are you rehearsing every single day without even realizing it? What if the energy you are trying to attract is already present, but hidden beneath everything you have not allowed yourself to feel? Have you ever noticed how certain emotions seem to linger, even when you try to move on? Not loudly, not always consciously, but subtly influencing your reactions, your choices, your sense of self. This is where transformation moves beyond the mind and into the body, because the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Every suppressed emotion, every moment you had to stay strong, every feeling you pushed aside to keep going, none of it disappears. It stays stored as tension, as contraction, as a quiet background signal shaping how open or guarded you feel in your life. And this is why simply thinking differently often does not create lasting change. Because what is stored in the body is not released through logic, it is released through presence, through allowing, through feeling, without immediately trying to fix, explain, or escape. At first, this can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because your system is used to avoiding intensity, not moving through it. But the moment you begin to stay with a sensation, without labeling it, without resisting it, something shifts. The energy begins to move. The contraction softens. And what once felt overwhelming starts to dissolve, not by force, but by being fully experienced. This is where a deeper kind of freedom emerges. Not the freedom of controlling your emotions, but the freedom of no longer being controlled by what you have been avoiding. So the question becomes, what if the expansion you are seeking is on the other side of the very feelings you have been trying not to feel? What if the state you call flow is not something you enter, but something you stop interrupting? Have you ever experienced those rare moments where everything feels effortless? Where time fades, your mind quiets, and your actions feel almost guided, precise, natural, alive? In those moments, you are not forcing performance. You are not overthinking. You are simply in it. And yet, most people treat flow as something occasional, accidental, something that happens when conditions are perfect. But what if flow is actually your natural state, and it is only your mental interference that keeps pulling you out of it? Because every time you doubt yourself, compare, hesitate, or try to control the outcome, you create friction. You step out of the present moment and back into the mind. And the moment you do that, the channel narrows. Flow disappears, not because it left you, but because you left it. This is why presence is so powerful. When you are fully immersed, whether in creating, speaking, moving, or simply being, you are no longer divided internally. There is no observer judging, no voice correcting, no tension trying to prove something. There is only expression. And expression is magnetic. People can feel it, not because you are trying to impress, but because you are no longer fragmented. You are coherent, aligned, available. So here is the deeper realization. Flow is not reserved for special moments. It is what remains when resistance is removed. And the real question is, how often are you unknowingly interrupting your own natural state by trying to control what was meant to move through you? What if the presence you feel in certain people is not something they're doing, but something they have stopped doing? Have you ever been around someone who feels different, calm, grounded, almost magnetic, and you cannot quite explain why? They are not trying to impress you. They are not speaking louder or acting bigger. And yet, their energy fills the space. This is what coherence feels like. It is what happens when someone is no longer divided within themselves. No inner argument, no constant self-correction, no hidden tension between who they are and who they think they should be. Their thoughts, emotions, and body are no longer pulling in different directions. And that alignment creates a signal. A clear, stable frequency that others can feel, even if they cannot name it, because energy is always communicating. Long before words, long before logic, your nervous system is reading the field around you. It can sense safety. It can sense tension. It can sense authenticity. And when someone is deeply present, they regulate not only themselves, but the environment around them. This is why certain people make you feel more relaxed, more open, more like yourself, without saying anything at all. Now, imagine what happens when you begin to cultivate that within you, not by trying to become magnetic, but by removing the internal noise that fragments your energy, the overthinking, the self-doubt, the subtle need to perform. As those layers fall away, something natural begins to emerge. A quiet power. So, here is the question that changes your perspective. If your energy is always being felt, what are you communicating when you are not aware of yourself? What if the reason you feel disconnected from your power is not because it is missing, but because you have been searching for it in the wrong direction? Have you ever tried to become more high vibe, more aligned, more confident, only to feel like you are constantly chasing a state that never fully stays? As if peace, clarity, and expansion are something you must reach instead of something you already are? This is one of the most subtle traps in the journey of transformation. Because the moment you believe that what you seek is outside of you, you create distance. You reinforce the idea that you are not there yet. And from that space, every effort, even the most well-intentioned, comes from lack. But energy does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you are being. So when you chase a better version of yourself, you are unknowingly affirming that your current self is not enough. And that internal contradiction creates resistance. Not because you are incapable, but because you are divided. Now, consider a different approach. Instead of trying to reach a higher state, you stop. You become still. You bring your awareness inward, not to fix anything, but to reconnect. And in that quiet, something unexpected reveals itself. A sense of completeness that was never absent, only overlooked. Because love, clarity, abundance, they are not destinations. They are states of being that emerge when the noise settles. So the real question is not, how do I become that version of myself? But rather, what if I already am, and I have simply been too distracted to notice. What if the identity you have been protecting is not who you are, but a collection of stories you never questioned? Have you ever paused and asked yourself where your sense of I actually comes from? The way you describe yourself, the patterns you repeat, the limits you assume, how much of that is truly yours and how much was learned, absorbed, or inherited? Because what most people call identity is not something they consciously chose. It was built through childhood experiences, through emotional moments that shaped beliefs, through subtle messages about who you should be, how you should behave, what is acceptable, what is not. And over time, these impressions formed a structure, an internal narrative that feels so familiar, it begins to feel like truth. I am this kind of person. I always struggle with that. This is just how I am. But what if those statements are not definitions but repetitions? Because the more you repeat a story, the more your system organizes around it. Your thoughts align with it. Your emotions reinforce it. Your behavior confirms it. And reality begins to mirror it back, not because it is fixed, but because it is consistent. This is how the false self sustains itself, not through force, but through unconscious agreement. Now, imagine what happens when you interrupt that agreement. When you begin to see your identity not as a fact, but as a pattern. Something softens, something opens, and suddenly you are no longer confined by what you have been. So here is the question that begins to loosen everything. If your identity has been constructed over time, what becomes possible when you stop automatically believing it? What if nothing in your life has a fixed meaning except the meaning you keep giving it? Have you ever replayed a moment from your past and felt the same emotion all over again? The tension, the regret, the weight of what happened, as if it is still alive inside you. But what if what keeps that experience active is not the event itself, but the interpretation you continue to assign to it? Because reality, at its core, is neutral. Events happen. Words are spoken. Situations unfold. But the meaning, the emotional charge, the identity you attach, the story you build around it, that is created internally. And once a meaning is assigned, your system organizes around it as if it were truth. This is how a single moment can shape years of your life. Not because it defined you, but because you kept defining yourself through it. Now imagine this shift. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" you begin to ask, "What meaning have I been giving this? And is it still serving me?" Something powerful begins to change. Because the moment you question the meaning, you loosen its emotional grip. You create space between the experience and your identity. And in that space, something becomes possible that most people never realize. You can reinterpret, not to deny the past, but to release its control over your present. And when the meaning changes, the energy changes. And when the energy changes, the way reality responds to you begins to shift. So here is the deeper question. If your life has been shaped by the meanings you have carried, what happens when you choose a different one? What if healing is not about fixing what happened, but freeing yourself from the version of you that was created in response to it? Have you ever tried to move on, to let go, to finally release something from your past, only to feel like it still lives somewhere inside you? Not always in your thoughts, but in your reactions, your triggers, your patterns. As if a part of you is still responding to something that no longer exists. This is where most people misunderstand healing. They believe they need to solve the past, understand it perfectly, or find closure through explanation. But what if the past does not need to be solved, only re-seen? Because what holds the emotional charge is not the event itself. It is the identity that formed around it. The version of you that decided, "I am not safe. I am not enough. I have to be this way to be loved. And that version, even if it was created years ago, continues to operate in the present unless it is consciously released. Now imagine this shift. Instead of trying to change the past, you begin to observe the version of yourself that was shaped by it. With compassion, without judgment, you see the patterns not as flaws, but as responses. And in that awareness, something begins to loosen, because you are no longer inside the pattern. You are witnessing it. And what is witnessed can be transformed, not by force, but by disidentification. So here's the question that opens a deeper level of healing. If you are not the version of you that was created in pain, who are you without that story? What if the tension you feel in your body is not random, but stored energy waiting to be released? Have you ever noticed how certain situations trigger reactions that feel bigger than the moment itself? A simple comment, a delayed message, an unexpected change, and suddenly your body tightens, your chest contracts, your breathing shifts. It feels immediate, almost automatic. But what if that reaction is not coming from the present, but from something that was never fully processed? Because the body does not forget. Every time an emotion was suppressed, every moment you had to hold yourself together instead of feeling what was real, that energy did not disappear. It was stored, held in muscles, in posture, in subtle patterns of tension that became part of your baseline. And over time, this stored energy begins to shape your experience. Not just how you feel, but how you respond, how open you are, how safe or unsafe the world appears to you. This is why transformation cannot be only mental. You can understand everything, see your patterns clearly, even decide to change, but if the body is still holding unresolved tension, it will continue to pull you back into familiar reactions. So the shift begins here, not by forcing release, but by allowing sensation, by bringing awareness into the body without trying to escape what you feel. At first, it may be subtle, a tightness, a heaviness, a pulse of emotion. But when you stay with it without resistance, something begins to move. And as it moves, something opens. So, here's the question. What if your next level of freedom is not in thinking differently, but in finally allowing your body to release what it has been holding for you? What if the version of you that feels contracted, tense, controlled, constantly trying is not your true nature, but a state your system learned to survive? Have you ever felt like you are always slightly on guard? Even when nothing is wrong, there is a subtle tightness and need to monitor, to anticipate, to manage how things unfold. It can feel normal, even necessary. But what if that state is not who you are, but how you adapted? Because the nervous system is always asking one silent question: am I safe? And when the answer is uncertain, even in small ways, the body shifts into protection. It contracts. It prepares. It becomes alert. And from that state, your thoughts change, your behavior changes, your energy changes. You begin to control instead of trust, to perform instead of express, to prove instead of simply be. This is what the contracted self looks like. Not broken, but guarded. Not weak, but defensive. And the more this state is repeated, the more it becomes familiar. Until one day, you start to believe that this is just your personality. But it is not. Because there is another state available. An open state, where your body feels safe enough to relax. Where your energy expands instead of tightens. Where you're not trying to manage every outcome, but are present enough to respond naturally. And here is the key shift. You do not force yourself into openness. You create the conditions for safety, and openness emerges. So here is the question that begins to rewire everything. If your contraction was learned, What happens when you begin to teach your system that it is safe to open again? What if the behaviors you judge the most in yourself are not your flaws, but your system's way of asking for safety? Have you ever caught yourself people-pleasing, overthinking, delaying decisions, or pulling away from something you actually want, and immediately labeled it as self-sabotage? It feels frustrating, even contradictory. You know what you want, yet something inside you resists. But what if that resistance is not against your goals, but in protection of you? Because many of the patterns you call toxic were once intelligent responses. People-pleasing may have helped you avoid rejection. Perfectionism may have helped you feel worthy. Avoidance may have helped you escape overwhelm. And over time, these strategies became automatic, not because they are effective now, but because your nervous system still associates them with safety. This is why simply trying to discipline yourself out of these behaviors often fails. You are not just changing actions, you are challenging a system that believes it is protecting you. So the real shift is not force, it is awareness. When a pattern arises, instead of immediately trying to eliminate it, you pause. You notice it. You ask, what is this trying to protect me from? And in that moment, something powerful happens. You interrupt the automatic loop. You bring consciousness into what was unconscious. And slowly the pattern begins to loosen, not because you fought it, but because you no longer need it in the same way. So here is the deeper question. What if your patterns are not the problem, but the doorway to understanding the part of you that is still seeking safety? What if the discomfort you keep trying to escape is not a signal to stop, but a signal that something inside you is ready to change? Have you ever felt that urge to distract yourself the moment something uncomfortable arises? You reach for your phone, shift your focus, rationalize, or simply push the feeling away. It happens so quickly that you barely notice it. But what if that moment, right before you escape, is the exact point where transformation is waiting? Because discomfort, in its pure form, is not the enemy. It is information. It is energy moving through your system, asking to be acknowledged. But when you avoid it, suppress it, or override it with old coping patterns, that energy does not disappear. It stays unresolved, repeating itself in different forms, different situations, different relationships. This is why certain cycles feel endless, not because you are stuck, but because you have not yet allowed yourself to fully feel what is underneath. Now, imagine something different. Instead of escaping the sensation, you pause. You stay. You let the discomfort exist in your body without immediately trying to fix it, name it, or understand it. At first, it may feel intense, but then something unexpected happens. The sensation begins to shift. It rises, peaks, and then, slowly, it dissolves. Not because you controlled it, but because you allowed it. And in that moment, you realize something powerful. You are not the discomfort. You are the awareness holding it. So here is the question that opens a new level of freedom. What if the emotions you avoid are not blocking your expansion, but guiding you directly toward it? What if the reason your growth feels uncomfortable is not because something is wrong, but because you are becoming unfamiliar to yourself? Have you ever stepped into a new behavior, speaking up, setting a boundary, choosing yourself, and immediately felt a strange discomfort, almost like you were doing something unnatural? As if a quiet voice inside you questioned, "Is this really me?" This is one of the most misunderstood moments in transformation. Because when you begin to shift out of old patterns, your system does not recognize the new state as you yet. It recognizes what is familiar. And what is familiar, even if limiting, feels safe. So when you act from a new level, more authentic, more open, more aligned, it can feel foreign. Not because it is false, but because it has not been repeated enough to become your baseline. This is where many people stop. They interpret discomfort as misalignment, when in reality, it is expansion. They return to old behaviors, not because they want to, but because those behaviors feel like home. But what if home is simply what you have practiced the most? Now imagine staying with the new version, not forcing it, not performing it, but gently allowing it to exist, even when it feels unfamiliar. Over time, something begins to shift. The new becomes natural. The open state becomes stable. And what once felt uncomfortable begins to feel like truth. Because identity is not fixed. It is trained. So, here is the question that changes how you see your growth. If discomfort is simply the feeling of becoming someone new, what happens when you stop retreating from it and allow yourself to stay? What if the version of you that has been playing small is not the safest version, but the most limited one? Have you ever felt the impulse to hold back, to stay quiet, to not fully express what you think or feel, to dim your presence just enough to avoid attention or judgment? It can feel like humility, like caution, like control. But what if it is something else? What if it is the echo of an old agreement? Because at some point, you may have learned that being fully seen was risky, that expressing too much could lead to rejection, that standing out could invite discomfort. And so, without even realizing it, you adjusted. You minimized. You shaped yourself into something more acceptable. And over time, that version became familiar, comfortable, safe. But here is the deeper truth. What feels safe is not always what is true. Because every time you shrink, every time you silence yourself, every time you choose comfort over authenticity, something inside you knows. There is a quiet dissonance, a subtle loss of energy, not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are not fully being. Now imagine the opposite. You allow yourself to expand, to speak, to express, to take up space, not from ego, but from truth. At first, it may feel exposed, but then something shifts. Your energy aligns, your presence strengthens, and what once felt risky begins to feel real. So, here's the question. If playing small has been your strategy, what version of your life has it been quietly holding you back from? What if self-respect is not something you build over time, but something you reinforce in each moment you choose yourself? Have you ever noticed how your sense of worth shifts depending on your choices? Not in big, dramatic ways, but in small, almost invisible decisions. The moments when you speak up instead of staying silent. When you set a boundary instead of overextending. When you follow what feels true, even if it is uncomfortable. Each of those moments sends a signal, not just to others, but to yourself. Because self-respect is not an abstract idea. It is a lived experience. It is the result of how consistently you align your actions with what you know deep down is right for you. And here is where the shift becomes powerful. Every time you override your truth to avoid discomfort, your system registers that. It learns, my needs are secondary. My voice is negotiable. My truth is optional. But every time you choose authenticity, even in the smallest way, you interrupt that pattern. You begin to rebuild something internal. Trust. Not in the external world, but in yourself. And that trust changes everything. Because when you trust yourself, your energy stabilizes. You are no longer seeking validation in the same way. You are no longer negotiating your own value. You become grounded, coherent, clear. So here is the question that reshapes your identity. If self-respect is created through your choices, what version of yourself are you reinforcing with the way you are living today? What if the most powerful shift you can make is realizing that you are not your thoughts, not your emotions, and not your patterns? Have you ever said, "This is just how I am," as if it were a fixed truth? As if your reactions, your habits, your internal dialogue were permanent parts of your identity? It feels convincing because those patterns have been with you for so long. But what if they are not you, only something you have been experiencing? Because thoughts arise, emotions move, patterns repeat, but none of them are constant. They appear, they intensify, they fade. And yet, there is something in you that remains through all of it. Something that notices. Something that is aware. And that awareness is not unstable. It does not fluctuate with every passing thought or feeling. It is the space in which all of it happens. This is the shift of disidentification. When you stop saying, "I am anxious," and begin to see, anxiety is present. When you stop saying, "I am this pattern," and begin to notice, this pattern is happening. You create distance, and in that distance you reclaim choice. Because if you are not the pattern, you are no longer bound to repeat it automatically. You can observe it, interrupt it, move differently. So here is the deeper question. If you are not defined by what arises within you, who are you when you step back and simply become the one who is aware? What if the resistance you feel is not something you need to fight, but something that dissolves the moment you allow it? Have you ever tried to push away a feeling, tightness, anxiety, pressure, only to notice that it grows stronger the more you resist it? It is as if the act of rejection gives it more weight, more presence, more control. This is the paradox of resistance. What you resist persists, not because it is powerful, but because your attention keeps it active. Now imagine something radically different. Instead of pushing the sensation away, you turn toward it. You bring your awareness directly into the body, not to analyze, not to label, but to feel. The tightness in your chest, the heaviness in your stomach, the subtle contraction in your throat, and you stay with it, without trying to fix it, without trying to make it disappear. At first, this can feel counterintuitive. But then something unexpected begins to happen. The sensation, once resisted, starts to soften. It shifts. It moves. Because what was once held in place by tension is now allowed to release. This is the power of allowing. Not passive acceptance, but conscious presence. And in that presence, the energy that once felt stuck begins to flow again. So here is the question that changes everything. If resistance is what keeps energy trapped, what happens when you stop resisting what you feel and allow it to unfold naturally within you? What if the most powerful intelligence you have access to is not in your mind, but in your heart? Have you ever noticed how the mind tends to calculate, compare, and predict, while something deeper within you simply knows? A quiet signal, often subtle, often ignored. Not loud like thoughts, but steady, consistent, true. This is the difference between mental force and heart coherence. The mind operates through control. It tries to secure outcomes, avoid uncertainty, and construct safety through logic. But the heart operates differently. It does not need to prove. It does not need to rush. It responds from alignment, not from fear. And here is where your energy shifts dramatically. When your actions, your words, and your presence come from the mind alone, they often carry tension, effort, a need to get it right. But when they emerge from the heart, there is a different quality. Softness without weakness, clarity without pressure, strength without force. This is what people feel when they describe someone as authentic. Not perfect, not flawless, but real. Because the heart does not perform, it expresses. And when you begin to live from that space, your energy becomes coherent in a way the mind alone cannot create. So instead of asking, "What should I do?" you begin to feel, "What is true here?" And that shift changes how you relate, how you create, how you move through your life. So here's the question. If your heart already knows the direction that aligns with you, why do you keep asking your mind to decide? What if becoming unrecognizable is not about changing who you are, but finally allowing who you are to be seen? Have you ever imagined a version of yourself that feels freer, more open, more aligned, and then immediately questioned whether that version is realistic? As if becoming that person would require a complete transformation, something distant, something difficult. But what if that version is not something you need to create, only something you need to stop suppressing? Because everything you have explored so far points to one truth. The noise was never your nature. The tension was never your essence. The patterns were never your identity. They were layers. Protective, learned, repeated, but not original. And as those layers begin to dissolve, through awareness, through presence, through feeling instead of resisting, something else naturally emerges. Not forced, not constructed, but revealed. A version of you that feels lighter, yet stronger. More open, yet more grounded. More authentic without trying to be. And this is where the idea of becoming unrecognizable takes on a completely different meaning. It is not about losing yourself. It is about shedding what was never truly you. So when others begin to notice the shift, your calm, your clarity, your presence, it may seem like you have changed completely. But from within, it feels different. It feels like returning. So here is the question that brings everything together. If who you are has always been beneath the layers, what is left to become when there is nothing left to hide? What if the life you are waiting for is not something that arrives, but something that begins the moment you stop postponing who you are? Have you ever told yourself, "When I feel more ready, when things are clearer, when I fix this part of me, then I will fully step into my life"? It sounds reasonable, even responsible. But what if that waiting is the very thing keeping you disconnected? Because there is always another condition, another reason to delay, another version of yourself you think you must become before you are allowed to live, express, choose, expand. But what if there is no final version waiting for you at the end of this process? What if there is only this moment and your willingness to meet it fully? Because everything you have explored, the release of old identities, the awareness of thought, the openness of the body, the coherence of your energy, it all points here. To now. Not as a concept, but as a lived experience. The moment where you stop rehearsing the past. Stop negotiating your truth. Stop waiting to feel different before you act differently. And instead you begin from where you are, with what is present, without needing certainty. Because this is where your energy shifts from potential to creation. Not by force, but by alignment. So here is the final question that redefines everything. If your reality responds to who you are being, who do you choose to be now that you see you were never meant to become? Only to remember? If this message shifted something inside you, subscribe to the channel and stay connected. Like this video to anchor this awareness and help it reach others who need it. And share it, because someone close to you may be waiting for exactly this reminder.